always saying, no, this is completely off.
Yeah. So another thing that I want to talk about is how most of the condos in Toronto are apparently owned by investors. What do you guys think that means for first-time home buyers, or like that they're competing with these investors to buy these condos, which are typically would have been like a pretty good option for first-time home buyers?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the condo piece is fascinating, like just given the oversupply that we're seeing right now and the supply pipeline. I mean, you would be operating on the assumption, just qualitatively, that most of your pre-con buyers probably also aren't buying, or probably also aren't end users, right, or first time buyers. Like typically if a first time buyer was buying a house, they wouldn't want to wait like 6 years to move into it. They would probably just buy a resale during that day. I honestly think that the pre-con market, as that pipeline moves in, like I think we have 100,000 units closing in the next 5 years. And so that's a ton of new supply. I think the existing resale supply is the highest we've ever seen it, and continuing to pile up. If you have the time to pick through all those listings and shop for a deal, I think it's already a pretty opportune market. I mean, and for somebody who's trying to get into the market, who, still living in an urban area, who wants to be close to work for, career upward mobility, for close proximity to potential mates, perhaps if they're single, nightlife, etc. And having everything, all of your maintenance done for you, so you can focus on other things like, work, probably, like just, earning, making as much money as you can. I think it's honestly makes a lot of sense. I think that the thing that a lot of people struggle to realize about, let's call it like a market crash or the market dropping even, is that people get more and more scared the more that prices drop, because prices are dropping, and people get scared by that, right? Like, oh, everyone's losing money. But the further the prices go down, the less risk there is below you, right? Mm-hmm. And the further that prices come up, the more risk there is below you. And so as prices come down, there's more upside because we know what prices are capable of getting to, and there's less downside because you're already closer to the bottom, right? And the buyers and a lot of people want to like try and time the bottom, right? They're like, oh, I'm just waiting for another 10% down. It's like, okay, if you're waiting for another 10% decrease in house prices, like if that's what you actually think is going to be the realistic outcome, and you assume that every property on the market today is priced at market value, or you can go on House Sigma or something else and get market value for that property, you should be offering 10% below all of those values and being the person who creates the bottom in a couple of months, rather than being somebody who's sitting around waiting for the bottom, because by the time the bottom is visible, by the time you're on that upswing, you already missed it. And so you can't necessarily time it. You have to create it. That's the piece that I think a lot of people don't think enough about as prices are coming down.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think they're thinking more about just interest rate bottom, right? Like they're trying to find that fine line between prices and interest rate, but then just timing that, they miss so much, because there was like a bit of a peak in the spring market, which is why everyone thought, oh, everything's going to be good now. But when you see it, if they're still waiting there, that would have been a good time, right? Even if the rate was still high, that would have been a good time for you to buy. But now there's more inventory for the condo. It's a completely different resale market, condo versus residential. And there's so much opportunity right now. So even if somebody's competing against investors, I would say you should just go now. And, you can time your closings pretty later on. And then hopefully there's more drops, and that helps you make it more affordable monthly. But
it's like Dan said, like when you have it, when you're actually buying low, there's less of a risk below you. So it makes sense to just make sure you're buying at a lower price, even if it's at a higher interest rate relative to now.
And I think you also have to remember, sorry.
Yeah, go. Yeah, I was just gonna say, or just like do the math, right? Like most people haven't done the math on what a difference between a 4.5 and a 3.99 interest rate is going to save them on their mortgage. It's like, okay, well, I'm buying at 4.5 today, so and I was assuming I was waiting for 3.99, so I'm just going to ask for $25,000 off the purchase price, because that's literally the only difference that I would have paid on the mortgage anyway over the first
Yeah.
5-year mortgage term. Like, and it's like, okay, well, if you're getting a sweet discount today and you're assuming that prices are going to go up as rates come down, then is there actually a point in waiting? Because if you're making the assumption that prices will go up if interest rates come down, which isn't necessarily the correct assumption, but I think most people feel that way. Then you need to do the math and say, okay, well, if I can get a 100K discount on what I feel the property is worth today, and I'm only paying 25 grand more interest, the math is pretty easy. I should buy it today.
Yeah.
Especially so if it's an investment, because the longer you own that property, the longer it's paying the principal off.
Yeah. I think what people get caught up with the interest rate is what they're going to be paying on a monthly basis. Canadians seem to be really caught up in, like, maybe because a lot of us are like living month to month, that we're really caught up in what is the monthly payment going to be. So that's what they get caught up with, the interest rate. And they're not really understanding that in the long run, you've actually saved yourself a lot and built up a lot more equity and built yourself wealth if you actually bought at a time where the price was low.
For people who say that, though, I would also just say, if you're buying a pre-con, you can do the math and see what the holdover cost would have been if you were to buy resale, and how much you pay in interest, maintenance fees, property tax. And if that's a lot over your 3-5 year term, then maybe you should just go for the pre-con right now. And there's a lot of incentives for them too. But that's just something that someone has to weigh out. It can't be just fixated on this is my monthly cost, because that's just going to be for a couple of years. And investors are definitely not thinking like that, right? They're holding these properties for 5, 10, 15 years, and they'll eventually make their money on either monthly cash flow or through the appreciation.
Yeah, absolutely. So maybe one more thing that I'd like to talk about is this new multi-unit insurance program, where that should promote investors to start building more multi-unit properties, because they're giving like extended amortization. I know this is like actually a topic you guys covered recently on your most recent podcast episode, which we were just listening to. Do you have any, like, maybe like a tidbit that you want to share with our audience so that they can understand what this program is and how they could maybe use it if they're looking to build their portfolio as in developers?
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess CMHC has a couple of different components now, given they just recently announced that they'll allow owner occupied up to 4 units to refi up to $2 million. So, below 4 units, you can almost like, there's a new availability now for, you're able to house hack, let's call it, where you can, buy a house, live in 1 unit, and add a couple of units through the it's going to be a federal loan program coming out in January called the Secondary Suite Loan Program.
Mm-hmm.
And then you'll be able to refi up to 90% of the value out of that. And then above 4 units, so 5 and above, that space has gotten a little bit difficult, I would say, for the average investor or developer, like kind of beginner investor developer, to work within, because of the cash and experience requirements and like covenant requirements from CMHC for developers, because I think that they've been seeing probably some small developers who maybe scaled too quickly getting access to that program. And so I would say, honestly, like, and this is interesting, like, kind of to return to that first time buyer conversation about condos, there's another unique opportunity forming for people who are comfortable living in like smaller units, don't want a large detached house, maybe want to own a detached lot and put a couple of units in it. I think that's like an interesting comparative or like just an interesting approach to building wealth while using your primary residence. And I think it seems like that's kind of what the government is intending to do. I think that's a portion of it. I think another portion is probably, to go all the way back to when we're talking about like distress. I think a lot of it is actually to eliminate a little bit of distress. So they're probably saying, hey, look, we've got a lot of people with, houses with, $800,000 mortgages on them, and the houses are worth $1 million. If we can give those people a loan of $250K to put a basement apartment in, it should actually get them by for the next mortgage term. So that could be actually some of that stress elimination as well. Yeah.
How do you guys feel about people putting in like modular homes in their backyards?
I honestly quite like the idea of like a garden suite, or look, it's not for everyone, but the reality is it's actually statistically for more of the population globally than it isn't, right?
Yeah.
Like in Canada, we have this idea that people shouldn't grow up in a condo or apartment. It's like, why? They do it everywhere else in the world, right? Or people shouldn't have to live in multi-generational dwellings, right? Families shouldn't have to live with their grandparents or their kids. It's like, well, there are many cultures that live in Canada that have lived here, like our first waves of migration from Italy, as an example, where it's not uncommon for families to have their adult children live in the home until they marry and start their own dwelling. Similarly, like, my family's from Europe. Most people live in multi-generational living arrangements. In many other places in the world, it is not uncommon. And so it shouldn't surprise us that as a population that is driven almost primarily by immigration, that we're heading towards, we're importing cultural norms that are happening in other places outside of Canada. We have the third highest, square footage per capita in the world, after the US and Australia. And I would expect that that's like for the rest of our lives, that number will just be on decline. And we have some of the fewest residents per house in the world. So like, I think it's like 2.6 people per dwelling in Canada on average. Again, US and Australia are the only ones with a smaller number than ours. And you can already see this taking place since the last census. I'm almost guaranteeing next census will surprise people quite a bit, that Canadians are continually like, if the excess demand that everybody's saying, like everyone's like, oh, there's so much population growth and there's so few houses, so prices have to go up, but prices aren't going up. It's weird, right? So what's happening? Well, all of those people are getting pushed into the existing housing stock. And so that's why we're seeing roommates being the fastest growing household size in Canada. That's why we're seeing multiplexes, stuff like that.
I know, like what you said is so true, that around the world, they have such different norms for what a normal living arrangement is. Like, for example, I think in like Sweden, they do a lot of these like pre-designed condo apartments that like everybody just basically kind of has the same design that they live in. And that's why like IKEA took off in Sweden, because it's like you can make that generalized furniture for those places. So definitely IKEA's caught on here. So maybe like their housing arrangements will also get caught on here as well.
Yeah. And I think backyards are so underutilized, and during the winter, no one uses them. Yeah. People complain about mowing their lawn and stuff now. So I definitely think it's a good plan. But how effective do you think it's actually going to be? Because I know they had the apartment loan kind of program, which was similar, and it didn't do too well. So what do you think this is different? What do you think? How effective do you think this is going to be?
Yeah, I mean, well, the original round they had was for like 4 multi-generational dwellings, and I think it was like 40 grand. So, I mean, it was probably like I think like the reality is we're pretty limited by construction costs here in the GTA.
Yeah.
In most of Canada, the phenomenon is similar. So I think as we start to see, Anika, I think you're talking about like more modular construction in Scandinavia. Yeah. As we start to see things like that play a bigger role. And I was at the most recent Ontario Home Builders Association conference, and modular is definitely a big conversation. Yeah. At least for garden suites, like where, you could, they're not huge, so you could just put one on a truck, really, to be honest, and roll it off and crane it into a backyard. I mean, that's supply that's instant, and that's what we need. We need agile supply. Like, we need supply that can be constructed today, not like concrete high rise that takes 5 years to pre-sell it now, but then it also takes 3 years to build it. That's not going to solve a problem. Whereas I think, so that's one piece. Modular should also hopefully bring the cost of construction down, and also that time exposure. So hopefully, I'm hopeful. I'm not optimistic about much, but I'm hopeful that those reforms will actually lead us in the right direction.
Yeah, I think we definitely need reforms on the lending side as well, because they're not eager to lend on these things, and they have so many restrictions on why they won't lend on those types of homes. So there's definitely a large conversation that needs to be had about that. But thank you so much, Daniel, for giving us so much insight on so many different topics.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Yeah, you've been great. And hopefully we get to see you again.
Yeah, for sure. I'm sure we will. I think we're gonna have a Christmas party for the podcast. So I mean, where it would be like a holiday party. We want to get like all the different like types of holiday sweaters together from across so that's our goal, like an ugly sweater party in December, I think. So we'll let you know when that's going on.
Okay, I definitely have an extensive wardrobe with ugly sweaters, so I'll be ready.
Perfect. Yeah, there you go.
Okay, we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.